Hi, my name is Amber Hunt, 54 years old, living alone on my 80-acre apple farm in Wenatchee, Washington. That Friday evening, I was just finishing dinner by myself as usual when the front door opened without a knock. My brother Kent, his wife Crystal, and my parents walked straight in, dragging suitcases behind them like they were moving in for good. They didn't call, didn't text, didn't ask. They just dropped their bags in the hallway and sat down at my dining table. Halfway through the meal, Crystal looked up completely casual and said in a tone that sounded more like an order than a request, "This month your brother needs to buy a new car, transfer $400,000 to me." I froze fork halfway to my mouth and asked, "What? Why would I transfer that kind of money?" She didn't even blink. "Your brother needs a new car to get his life together and finally settle down. You have to give it to him." I turned to Kent. He smirked, leaned back in his chair and said, "That's right. It's only $400,000. Just do it." The room went quiet except for the faint sound of the Columbia River outside. My parents didn't say a word. They just nodded like this was completely normal. I felt my jaw tighten, but I forced a small smile, excused myself, and walked upstairs. Once in my room, I picked up my phone, called the bank, and canceled every single supplementary credit card under my name. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your state in the comments and tell me, has anyone in your family ever shown up unannounced and started making demands like they own your life? I read every single comment, so don't hold back. After that tense dinner, I finally realized it wasn't just a sudden argument. It was the culmination of 8 years of quiet exploitation. I stayed at the table long after they had gone upstairs, staring at the leftover food cooling on the plates, while an empty feeling spread through my chest. The memories came rushing back, sharp and painful. 8 years earlier, when my brother Kent Hunt, then 46 years old, lost his job at the largest construction firm in the city, he called me, sounding completely broken. I wired $3,000 that same month without asking questions. Then the next month, when he said he needed money to get back on his feet, I sent it again. When my sister-in-law, Crystal Hunt, complained about investment deals gone wrong that she swore would pay off big, I kept transferring the money because they always ended the call with just a little more time. Don't worry. I never asked for receipts, never demanded thanks, never even added up the total that had left my account. I simply believed it was my duty as the older sister, the only one who had managed to build a stable life after my divorce, and turn the farm into something solid. But in just one night, everything shifted. They arrived without warning, luggage piled high as if they planned to stay indefinitely. By early morning, when I went upstairs, I found the door to the master bedroom, the one with the largest windows overlooking miles of apple orchards, slightly ajar. Inside, Kent and Crystal's suitcases were wide open, their clothes already hanging in my closet. Crystal stepped out, gave me a small smile, and said it was the airiest room, best for Kent's health. They acted as if the decision had been made long ago, no need to consult the actual owner. When I came down to the kitchen to make coffee, Kent was already seated firmly at the head of the table, the spot I had always used. Crystal placed a mug in front of him, brushed his shoulder lightly, then turned to me with that sweet tone. "It just makes family life easier. You don't mind, right?" Breakfast dragged on longer than usual, the conversation starting out polite enough. Then Crystal steered it with chilling ease. She glanced around the spacious kitchen, her eyes lingering on the view of ripe apples through the window, and said, "A farm this size, one person can't possibly manage it all. Sell off a section, get cash for Kent's new car, and invest the rest for guaranteed returns. I've researched it thoroughly. Agricultural land around here is skyrocketing." Kent nodded immediately, his eyes lighting up, as if this was the moment he had been waiting for. My mother, Opal Hunt, and my father, Nelson Hunt, seated on either side, joined in with quick nods of agreement. No hesitation, no glance in my direction to see what I thought, whether I agreed or if I might need that land myself someday. They simply waited for me to say yes, as though refusal wasn't even an option. I said nothing. I didn't object, didn't argue, didn't let anger show on my face. I just held my coffee mug, took small sips, and memorized every word with perfect clarity. Crystal's soft but calculated tone, Kent's confident smile, the synchronized nods from my parents. It all felt like a performance rehearsed in advance, because right then I understood completely they were no longer asking, they were preparing to take. The next morning, while the house was still half asleep, I rose early as I always do. I moved through the quiet kitchen with the familiar rhythm I had kept for years, starting the coffee and pulling out the large glass pitcher I used for my herbal cleanse. It was the same strong detox blend I had relied on for nearly a decade. Nothing added, nothing different, just the usual mix of herbs that helped me feel clear and in control. I brewed it the way I always did. Set it on the breakfast table alongside fresh sourdough eggs and fruit from the orchard, then sat down to wait. One by one, they came downstairs. Kent shuffled in first, hair still damp from the shower, wearing the same confident expression he had worn the night before. Crystal followed close behind in silk pajamas, yawning theatrically, as she poured herself a large mug of the cleanse without asking what it was. "This smells healthy," she said brightly, taking a long sip. Kent filled his mug to the brim, raised it in a mock toast, and drank deeply. Mom and Dad appeared last, moving slower with age, but they both reached for the pitcher too. Dad even joked, "If this keeps me regular, I'm all in." They refilled cups, complimented the taste, and ate heartily, chatting about how energized they already felt. At first, everything seemed normal. The conversation stayed light, whether the drive from Ohio, plans for the day, but about 40 minutes after they finished, the first signs appeared. Kent shifted in his chair, pressed a hand to his stomach, and muttered something about feeling off. His face lost color quickly. Crystal laughed it off at first, calling him dramatic, but moments later her own eyes widened and she gripped the table edge. She pushed back abruptly and hurried upstairs, calling over her shoulder in a strained voice. Mom looked at Dad with growing concern. Dad tried to stand, swayed, and sat back down hard. Both began sweating, their breathing shallow. The sounds from upstairs and the downstairs bathroom were unmistakable, doors slamming, water running non-stop. Kent bolted for the powder room, face pale and clenched. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't panic. I simply picked up my phone, dialed 911, and spoke calmly to the operator, describing severe stomach distress in 4 adults, possible reaction to a strong herbal blend, signs of dehydration setting in fast. I gave the address, clearly answered every question, and stayed on the line until I heard sirens approaching. The paramedics arrived within minutes, professional and efficient. They assessed Mom and Dad first, both elderly, both showing clear dehydration and distress, and loaded them onto stretchers with IVs, started immediately. The ambulance lights flashed across the apple trees as it pulled away. Kent and Crystal, green-faced and unsteady, insisted they could drive themselves, and sped off in their SUV moments later, tires kicking up gravel. When the last vehicle disappeared down the long driveway, the farm fell into a silence I hadn't experienced in years. No voices echoing through the halls, no footsteps overhead, no demands hanging in the air. I stood alone in the kitchen, morning light pouring through the windows onto the scattered breakfast dishes, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, the space felt truly mine again. In that sudden, profound quiet, everything I had been ignoring for years finally came into sharp, undeniable focus. That silence didn't bring peace. It opened a door. I walked through the house, slowly picking up scattered mugs and plates from breakfast, my mind still turning over everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. As I passed the living room, I noticed Crystal's expensive leather handbag left behind on the armchair. She had grabbed her keys and phone in such a rush that the bag had been forgotten entirely. I picked it up, intending only to move it to the entry table where she would see it later, but the zipper was half open and a thick manila folder was sticking out just enough to catch my eye. Curiosity wasn't what drove me. It was something colder, more instinctive. I sat down on the couch, placed the bag on the coffee table, and pulled the folder free. The tab on the front had my name typed in neat block letters: A. Hunt, Wenatchee Orchard Property. My pulse jumped hard. Inside were hundreds of photographs of my farm taken from every possible angle over the past 2 years. Some from the county road, some from the riverbank across the Columbia, a few clearly shot with a drone hovering above the orchards at night. The earliest images were date-stamped 24 months ago, long before Crystal had ever mentioned bringing Kent here for a family visit. My hands started to shake as I flipped through them, recognizing every barn, every row of trees, every corner of the land I had poured my life into. Deeper in the folder, I found a notarized power of attorney form, granting full authority to list and sell the property. The signatures at the bottom were unmistakable. Mom's looping capitals, Dad's cramped letters dated just 4 months earlier at a notary in Ohio. They had signed away my home without ever saying a word to me. At the back was a printed spreadsheet titled Closed and Pending Acquisitions. Last 5 years. 28 rows, 28 elderly owners' columns for age, estimated net worth, marital status, known heirs. My name sat in row 29, status marked in progress. I felt the room tilt for a moment, the betrayal hitting like a physical blow. This wasn't greed born overnight. This was calculated long-term predation. I grabbed my phone and dialed the first number I could think of that might make sense of it. Jade Gray, Crystal's ex-girlfriend from 6 years back, the one whose name had come up once in passing when Crystal dismissed her as bitter and unstable. Jade answered on the third ring, voice cautious until I introduced myself. When I described the folder, there was a long pause, then a bitter laugh. "You found it," she said. "Send me pictures. I'll send you everything I have." Within minutes, police reports, forged deeds, and bank records from Jade's own loss of her Portland home arrived in my inbox. Before I could process it all, I called Pearl Ross, an 80-year-old widow whose contact information was listed in the spreadsheet as a prior closed deal. Her voice trembled but stayed sharp as she confirmed every detail. Crystal had charmed her, convinced her to sell her family farm for a fraction of its value to fund a safe retirement community, then vanished with the money. Pearl now lived on government assistance with nothing left. I didn't try to handle this alone. I forwarded every image, every scan, every email to my longtime friend and estate attorney, Terry Ward. She called me back within the hour, voice steady and professional. "Amber, this is organized elder financial exploitation across state lines. I'm packaging everything securely and contacting the right authorities now. Do not touch anything else until they advise." By the time I set the phone down, the sun was lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the orchards outside. My hands were steady again, but the anger had settled into something colder and clearer. At that moment, I no longer had any doubt. This wasn't a family disagreement anymore. This was crime. Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find my cousin Lance Lane standing on the porch, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, eyes already narrowed with disapproval. He had flown in from Portland that morning after Mom called him in tears, telling him I had gone too far and put everyone in the hospital. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, voice tight as he set his bag down. "Amber, what the hell is going on? Mom says you poisoned the whole family and called ambulances like it was nothing. Kent and Crystal are furious. You've torn everything apart." His words carried that familiar mix of frustration and certainty, the same tone he used when we were kids, and he thought he knew best. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice or try to explain right away. I just led him to the kitchen table where I had spread out every piece of evidence, the folder of photographs, the forged power of attorney with Mom and Dad's signatures, the spreadsheet listing elderly victims, printouts of emails from Jade and Pearl. I handed him the stack and sat across from him, letting the documents speak for themselves. Lance started flipping through the photos first, frowning at the drone shots of the orchards taken at night. Then he reached the power of attorney, paused longer on the signatures, and moved to the spreadsheet. His breathing changed as he read row after row of names, ages, net worth estimates. When he got to my name in the in-progress column, he stopped completely. The color drained from his face. He went back to the beginning and read more slowly, fingers tightening on the pages. Minutes passed in total silence. I watched his expression shift from skepticism to confusion, then to something closer to horror. He set the papers down, carefully rubbed a hand over his jaw, and looked at me for the first time since arriving. His voice came out quieter, almost broken. "Jesus, Amber. This is real." I nodded once. He leaned back in the chair, staring at the table as if seeing it for the first time. More minutes went by. Finally, he pushed the documents toward me, stood up, and pulled me into a hug that felt tighter and more desperate than any I remembered from him. "I'm sorry," he said against my shoulder. "I flew down here ready to defend them. I was wrong. I'm so damn sorry." We stayed like that for a moment before he pulled away, eyes wet but determined. Without another word about blame, he picked up his phone and dialed the non-emergency line for the county sheriff's office. He did most of the talking, voice steady and precise, describing the evidence of organized fraud targeting elderly property owners across state lines. The deputy on the line asked several sharp questions, then told us to sit tight, an investigator would be out soon. While we waited, Lance opened his duffel and pulled out a set of high-resolution security cameras he always carried for his engineering contracts. He spent the next couple of hours installing them at key points around the farm front gate, back entrance, barn office, linking everything to a silent alert system that fed directly to both our phones and the sheriff's dispatch. He worked methodically, explaining each placement without needing to fill the air with unnecessary talk. By the time he finished, the sun was setting over the orchards, and the house felt different, protected in a way it hadn't been before. We didn't celebrate or make dramatic promises. We just sat at the kitchen table again, coffee in hand, going over the evidence one more time to make sure nothing was missed. We weren't loud about it. We just prepared thoroughly. Lance and I were still in the office reviewing the day's recordings one last time before turning in when the silent alert lit up the feed from the back door camera. A figure in dark clothing slipped through the gate, moving quickly but carefully along the path that led to the main house. The motion lights didn't trigger, she knew exactly where to step to avoid them. When the hallway camera caught her face under the faint glow of the nightlight, there was no doubt. It was Crystal. She had a key, the spare one Mom and Dad kept for emergencies, the one I had never gotten around to changing because I trusted family too much. She used it smoothly, easing the door open without a sound, then closing it behind her just as quietly. Her movements were practiced, confident, like someone who had studied the layout for months. She avoided the creaky floorboards in the hall, kept to the shadows, and headed straight upstairs toward my office. Lance froze beside me, hand tightening on the desk edge. We watched as she reached the office door, tried the handle locked, as we had made sure, and then pulled a small tool from her pocket to work the simple mechanism. It took her less than 30 seconds to get inside. Once in, she went directly to the bookshelf panel that hid the safe, fingers finding the release, as if she had watched me open it countless times through a window or a hidden lens. She knelt, pulled a flashlight from her bag, and started examining the dial. The safe beeped softly on her first wrong combination attempt. She muttered something under her breath, tried again, more deliberate this time. That small sound was all the deputies waiting in the adjacent guest room needed. The closet door swung open silently behind her. "Hands up, turn around slowly." The command came low and firm. 4 red dots appeared on her back as the overhead light flipped on. Crystal dropped the tool, instantly raised her arms, and turned with deliberate calm. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on the monitor in the corner that showed Lance and me watching live. For a split second, her mask slipped surprise, then cold calculation. She tried the charm anyway. "Officers, this is my sister-in-law's house. I just came back for personal items I left behind. No need for all this." The lead deputy didn't respond with words, he simply cuffed her, while another read her rights in an even tone. They unzipped the small backpack she carried. Inside was the USB drive with the full victim database, a printed copy of the forged power of attorney, and a few other documents she clearly intended to destroy or remove. The evidence was overwhelming. The live feed time-stamped every step, the key in her hand, the tools, the contents of the bag. No dramatic struggle, no raised voices. She was walked out calmly, placed in the back of a cruiser, and driven away under the quiet night sky. Lance closed the office door after the last deputy left, leaned against it for a long moment, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, relief mixed with something heavier. We didn't speak much after that. There was nothing left to say in the moment. It was simply the instant when the truth had no escape route left. Sunday morning, the whole family returned from the hospital. They walked into the kitchen looking worn-out, faces still pale from the night before, carrying the same suitcases they had arrived with 2 days earlier. Kent led the way, avoiding my eyes as he set his bag down. Crystal was not with them. She was still in custody, and the absence hung heavy in the air. Mom shuffled in next, clutching her purse like a shield, while Dad followed slowly, leaning on the doorframe for support. The first words came from Dad's voice, hoarse and pleading. "Amber, we need to talk this through. It's all been a big misunderstanding. Crystal only wanted to help the family. You have to drop the charges, keep this quiet for all our sakes." Mom nodded quickly, tears already starting. "She's family, honey. We can't let her sit in jail over something like this. Think about what people will say." Kent finally spoke, stepping forward with hands open in a gesture that looked almost reasonable. "Come on, sis. No one meant for things to go this far. Just withdraw the complaint, pay the legal fees if needed, and we can put it behind us. We're blood." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't pace or shout. I simply reached for my phone on the counter, opened the voice memo app, and pressed play on the short recording I had pulled from Mom's cloud backup weeks earlier, before any of this weekend started. Mom's own voice filled the kitchen, clear and casual. "Once the sale goes through, we split the proceeds evenly. Amber has more than enough. She won't even notice until everything is settled and we're all taken care of." Dad's recorded reply followed Kent, and Crystal deserved their share too. It's only fair after everything. The playback lasted less than 30 seconds, but the silence that followed stretched much longer. Kent's face went slack, his outstretched hands dropping to his sides. Mom's tears stopped midstream, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Dad stared at the floor, shoulders sagging further as if the weight of the words pressed him down. No one tried to explain. No one denied it. No one found another excuse. I let the quiet settle for a moment longer, then spoke evenly, looking at each of them in turn. "I'm done. As of today, I no longer have parents. I no longer have a brother. You are people who share a last name I used to trust. There will be no more money, no more visits, no more contact. This ends here." Mom started sobbing, then reaching out a trembling hand, but I stepped back. Kent's expression shifted from shock to anger, mouth twisting as if he wanted to argue, but the recording still echoed in the room and nothing came out. Dad just stood there, silent, eyes fixed on a spot somewhere past my shoulder. I had already called the locksmith while waiting for them to return. His van pulled into the driveway minutes later. He worked efficiently, new deadbolts on every exterior door, fresh codes on the gate, and alarm system, every key they possessed now useless. They watched the whole process from the living room, bags at their feet, the metallic clicks of new locks sounding louder than any argument could have. When he finished, I opened the front door wide. Sunlight poured in across the floor. "Your ride to the airport is outside," I said. "One-way tickets to Ohio paid for this one last time. After that, you're on your own." Mom tried one final embrace as she passed, but I stayed still and let her arms fall away. Kent muttered something bitter under his breath. Dad paused on the threshold for a long second, but never looked back. Lance closed the door behind them, turned the new lock, and set the alarm. The house fell completely quiet again. Everything ended right there. No ambiguity, no lingering regret. 6 months later, the apple farm had returned to its quiet rhythm. The legal process moved faster than I expected once federal investigators took over the case. Crystal was convicted on multiple counts of elder financial exploitation across state lines and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The judge described her pattern as one of the most systematic he had seen in years, with no leniency for the calculated nature of the crimes. She appealed, but the evidence was ironclad, and the sentence stood. Kent lost everything in the fallout. The loans he had co-signed with Crystal came due. The banks foreclosed on their house outside Columbus, and the repossession notices piled up quickly. He ended up taking manual labor jobs in a nearby town, moving from site to site, living in cheap weekly rentals. He never reached out again. Mom and Dad could no longer afford the mortgage on their Ohio home after the reverse loans and credit lines caught up with them. They sold what little equity remained for far less than they owed and moved into a government-subsidized senior apartment outside Dayton. It was small, basic, with thin walls and shared facilities, but Social Security and assistance programs kept them afloat. No Christmas cards arrived that year, and I didn't send any either. I stayed on the farm and poured myself into the work that had always grounded me. The orchards bloomed fuller than ever that spring, and harvest season brought record yields of crisp, sweet apples that sold out at markets across the state. I hired a small, reliable crew, upgraded irrigation, and watched the land thrive under care that finally felt unburdened. Through the restitution process, I helped set up payments for Jade Gray and Pearl Ross from the seized assets. Jade rebuilt slowly, buying a modest home with the funds. Pearl received enough to leave the state facility and move into a comfortable assisted living community where she could tend a small garden again. Hearing their updates brought a quiet satisfaction I hadn't expected. Lance became a regular visitor, driving down from Portland every couple of months. We grilled steaks on the patio, walked the rows of trees at sunset, and talked about everything except the people who used to sit at that table. He was the only family tie that remained, and it felt earned rather than obligatory. Some evenings I sat on the porch with a glass of cider pressed from my own apples, watching the light fade over the Columbia River, and realized the weight I had carried for years was truly gone. The farm was mine in every sense, now paid for, protected, and peaceful. I learned one thing with absolute clarity: real family isn't defined by the people who share your blood and demand pieces of you. It's built from the ones who respect your boundaries, your worth, and your right to live without constant sacrifice. Thank you for staying with me through this entire story. If anything in it resonated with you, whether it's setting boundaries, recognizing manipulation, or finding peace after cutting ties, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and they help others feel less alone. If this video meant something to you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories like this one. I appreciate every one of you.